My father nearly had a heart attack when I told him I was quitting medical school to open a coffee shop. In our family, success had a very specific definition. You either became a doctor like him and my older brother Michael, or a lawyer like my sister Andrea. There was no room for alternatives, especially not something as lowly as serving coffee. Do you have any idea how much money we spent on your education? He roared, his face turning the same shade of red as the expensive wine he just spilled on our dining room table. 8 semesters at Johns Hopkins, and you want to become a barista? My mother sat silently, dabbing at her eyes with an embroidered napkin. She always cried when she was disappointed, and right now she was very disappointed. It's not just about serving coffee, I tried to explain. I have a vision for something different, something unique. Unique? Michael interrupted with a snort. He adjusted his designer glasses, looking every bit the successful neurosurgeon he was about to become. Have you seen how many coffee shops fail in their first year? How many Starbucks are already on every corner? Andrea, fresh from winning her first major case at her prestigious law firm, couldn't resist joining in. I'll let her try, she said with fake sympathy. When she fails, she can always come back to medical school. Assuming I'll take her back. I looked down at the business plan hidden in my laptop bag. I'd spent months developing it, researching everything from bean sourcing to customer psychology. But I knew they wouldn't want to see it. In their eyes, I was just their foolish little sister having some sort of quarter-life crisis. I'm using my trust fund, I announced quietly. The room fell silent. Absolutely not. My father's voice was ice cold. That money is for your future, not for some ridiculous coffee shop fantasy. I turned 25 last month. I reminded him. The trust is mine to control now. My father stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. If you do this, you're on your own. No more support, no more safety net. When this fails, and it will fail, don't come crying to us. I stood up too, surprisingly calm. I won't. That night, I emptied my trust fund, all $200,000 of it, and put it into a new business account. The next morning, I signed a lease on a small storefront in a quiet neighborhood far from the trendy areas where most coffee shops clustered. My family thought I was crazy to choose such an unfashionable location, but they didn't understand my plan. The building had history. It was an old bookstore that had closed down years ago, with beautiful wooden shelves still lining the walls and a small garden in the back. The rent was cheap because no one else wanted a location so far from the hip districts. But I saw its potential. I named it The Last Page, a nod to the building's history and my own new chapter. Instead of gutting the interior like most modern coffee shops would, I restored the old shelves, filling them with used books that customers could read while they drank their coffee. The garden became a peaceful oasis where people could sit among herbs and flowers that I would use in our signature drinks. But what made The Last Page truly different wasn't its atmosphere, it was the coffee itself. During my time in medical school, I'd become fascinated with the chemistry of coffee, how different roasting techniques and brewing methods affected not just taste, but the way caffeine was released into the body. I developed my own roasting profiles, experimenting with timing and temperature until I created something unique. My first employee was an engineering student named David who dropped out of MIT to pursue his passion for coffee roasting. He thought my ideas about coffee chemistry were brilliant, and together we spent countless nights perfecting our techniques. "This isn't just coffee," he said one night as we tested our latest roast. "This is science." The day we opened, exactly 3 customers came in. The next day, we had 5. My family didn't even bother to show up for the opening. Michael sent a text. "Hope you kept your medical school notes." But slowly, something started happening. People who tried our coffee came back. Then they brought friends. Word spread about the strange little coffee shop with the incredible drinks and the peaceful atmosphere. A local food blogger wrote about our signature drink, The Awakening, which used a special roasting process I developed that released caffeine more slowly, providing sustained energy without jitters. The article went viral in the local food scene. Soon we had lines out the door every morning. Regular customers started calling ahead to reserve their favorite spots in the garden. Local business people discovered they could actually think and work better in our quiet, book-lined space than in noisy chain cafes. 6 months in, we were profitable. Not hugely so, but enough to prove this wasn't just a rich girl's fantasy. I reinvested every penny, improving our equipment, training staff in our special techniques, refining our processes. Then came the corporate customers. It started with a few executives from nearby offices who swore our coffee helped them focus better during long meetings. Soon, companies were ordering our coffee for their offices, willing to pay premium prices for our special roasts. 1 year after opening, I took a risk. I used every bit of profit we'd made to open a second location, this time in an old clock repair shop across town. We kept the original clock mechanisms as decoration, calling it the timepiece, and applied everything we'd learned from the first shop. It was an instant success. People loved that each location had its own character while maintaining the same exceptional coffee quality. We weren't trying to be a chain where every store looked identical. Each shop would have its own story. The local press started paying attention. The anti-Starbucks, how the last page is rewriting coffee shop culture, read one headline. We were featured in several major food magazines, praised for our innovative approach to both coffee and atmosphere. My family, of course, remained unimpressed. At every holiday dinner, they'd ask with barely concealed mockery how my little coffee shops were doing. I stopped trying to explain that we were actually doing quite well, that we had plans for expansion, that our profit margins were exceptional for the industry. I saw that new Starbucks open near your first shop, Andrea mentioned during Thanksgiving dinner, 2 years after I'd opened the last page. I suppose they'll put you out of business soon. What she didn't know was that our sales had actually increased since Starbucks opened nearby. Their customers would often wander over to us, curious about the cozy shop with the books and garden. Once they tried our coffee, many never went back to Starbucks. By the end of our second year, we had 5 locations, each in a unique historic building, each with its own theme but the same exceptional coffee. We called them the story shops, the last page, the timepiece, the inkwell, in an old stationery store, the stage door, a converted small theater, and the captain's log, a former maritime supply store. Each shop developed its own loyal following, but they all shared our commitment to quality and our unique roasting process. I had painstakingly documented every aspect of our operation, creating detailed manuals for everything from bean selection to customer service. David, my first employee, had become my head of operations, overseeing our central roasting facility where we produced coffee for all 5 locations. We'd expanded our wholesale business, supplying offices and small restaurants with our special roasts. Then came the call that would change everything. Ms. Sullivan. The voice on the phone was polished professional. This is James Chen from Venture Capital Partners. We've been watching your company with great interest. Would you be open to discussing potential investment? I looked around my office, the back room of the last page where it had all started. The walls were covered with expansion plans, revenue projections, and photos of potential new locations. We were doing well, but to grow at the scale I envisioned, we needed capital. I'm listening, I said. What happened next would transform my little coffee shops into something my family never imagined possible. But first, I had to prove that I could take this beyond just local success. I had to show that the story shops could become a national phenomenon while keeping everything that made us special. I hung up the phone and called David. How would you feel about building something bigger, much bigger? His response was immediate. I thought you'd never ask. The meeting with Venture Capital Partners took place in our original store, the last page. I insisted on it. If they were going to invest in us, they needed to understand what made us different. James Chen and his team arrived in expensive suits, looking somewhat out of place among our vintage books and mismatched furniture. I served them our signature awakening blend myself, watching as their skeptical expressions changed to surprise at the first sip. This is remarkable, Chen said, staring at his cup. What's different about it? I explained our proprietary roasting process, the chemistry behind our unique caffeine release system, and our commitment to sourcing beans directly from small farmers. Then I showed them our numbers, revenue growth, profit margins, customer retention rates. We're not just selling coffee, I told them. We're selling an experience, a feeling, a moment of peace in a chaotic world. And we're doing it while maintaining quality and authenticity at every location. They offered $50 million that day. I negotiated for $75 million and maintained majority control. The next phase of the story shops was about to begin. The expansion was strategic and careful. We didn't just open stores, we found buildings with character, places with history. Each new location had its own theme, its own story, while maintaining our core principles of quality and atmosphere. In Boston, we converted an old library into the Bookmark. In Chicago, a former record store became the Symphony. Each store was unique, yet instantly recognizable as part of the Story Shop's family. We opened our own barista training academy, ensuring every employee understood not just coffee preparation, but the science and story behind our methods. Our central roasting facility expanded into a research and development center, where we continue to innovate and perfect our techniques. 2 years after the investment, we have 50 locations across the East Coast and Midwest. Each one was profitable within its first 3 months. The media started calling us the anti-chain chain, a company that had managed to expand while maintaining the charm and quality of a local coffee shop. My family, meanwhile, remained unimpressed. At Christmas dinner that year, Michael was still skeptical. 50 shops? That's cute, he said, sipping his wine. But it's not exactly Starbucks, is it? Andrea chimed in. I heard they're opening 3 new locations in your area. Aren't you worried? I didn't tell them about the market research showing that our sales typically increased when a Starbucks opened nearby. Our customers were loyal because we offered something different, not just better coffee, but a genuine experience. Then came the game changer. A major tech company switched all their office coffee service to our brand after their CEO visited one of our shops. Other corporations followed. Our wholesale business exploded. We developed a subscription service for home delivery, complete with detailed brewing instructions and stories about each month's special roasts. The waiting list grew to months long. 3 years after the venture capital investment, we had 200 locations. Each one was profitable, each one was unique, and each one maintained the quality and atmosphere that had made the last page special. The press couldn't get enough of us. Forbes did a feature, The Story Shops, How One Woman's Vision is Disrupting the Coffee Industry. Fortune followed with The Billion-Dollar Bookstore, The Story Shop's Unique Path to Success. I sent copies of the magazines to my family. They didn't respond. Then came the morning that changed everything. I was in our newest location, the Lighthouse in Seattle. Yes, we dared to open in Starbucks' hometown when my phone rang. Ms. Sullivan, this is Howard Schultz. The founder of Starbucks was calling me directly. He wanted to meet. The meeting took place in our original store, her last page. Schultz arrived without an entourage, ordered an awakening, and spent an hour exploring the shop. You've created something extraordinary here, he said finally. Something we've been trying to recapture for years, the feeling of a real coffee house, a community space, while maintaining consistency and quality across hundreds of locations. Then he made his offer. Starbucks wanted to buy the Story Shops. All of it, for $4 billion. I listened to his pitch about how they would maintain our brand identity, keep our unique locations, preserve our methods. The number was staggering. $4 billion for what had started as a silly coffee shop. I'll need to think about it, I said. That night, I called an emergency family dinner. For once, they all showed up promptly, probably assuming I needed help because my business was failing. We sat at the same table where years ago, they had mocked my decision to open a coffee shop. My father still had that same disapproving look. Michael and Andrea still carried their air of superiority. So my father said, finally ready to admit this coffee shop experiment was a mistake. I took a sip of water, letting the moment stretch out. Actually, I wanted to let you know that Starbucks offered to buy my company today. The silence was deafening. For how much? Andrea asked finally, her lawyer instincts kicking in. $4 billion. My mother's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the table. Michael's fork clattered to his plate. My father's face went through a remarkable series of color changes. That's impossible, he stammered. I pulled out my phone and showed them the official offer letter. Their eyes widened as they saw the numbers, the terms, the signatures. But they're just coffee shops, Michael whispered. No, I corrected him. They're Story Shops, and there are 500 of them now. Andrea, ever the pragmatist, leaned forward. You're going to accept, right? $4 billion is. Actually, I turned them down this afternoon. If they were shocked before, now they were completely stunned. You what? My father exploded. Have you lost your mind? I stood up, smoothing my dress. The Story Shops isn't just about money. It's about creating something meaningful, something that makes people's lives a little better every day. We're profitable, we're growing, and we're doing it our way. Why would I give that up? But $4 billion, Michael repeated weakly, is less important than building something real. I finished. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an early meeting tomorrow. We're opening our first international location in London next month. I walked out of their house feeling lighter than air. The next morning, I was back at the last page before dawn, making coffee alongside our staff, chatting with regular customers, living the dream I had when I first decided to quit medical school. A week later, the news broke. Story Shops turns down $4 billion Starbucks offer, announces international expansion. Our customer numbers surge even higher. People loved that we chose an independence over a massive payday. One quiet evening, as I was closing up the last page, my father came in. He looked around the shop as if seeing it for the first time. The carefully curated books, the peaceful garden, the contentedly studying students, the laughing friends, the lovers on quiet dates. I never really understood before, he said softly. This isn't just a coffee shop, is it? I handed him a cup of our newest blend. It never was. He took a sip, his eyes widening slightly at the taste. I was wrong, he said finally. We were all wrong. This is what success really looks like. I smiled, remembering all the doubts, the mockery, the dismissal. Would you like to hear the story of how it all started? He sat down in one of our comfortable armchairs, looking at me with new eyes. Yes, he said. I would. And so, in the quiet of the shop where it had all begun, I told him the story of how a disappointed medical student had built an empire by believing in something different. How success doesn't always look like what people expect. How sometimes the best revenge isn't proving others wrong, but proving yourself right. Today, the Story Shops has over 700 locations worldwide, each with its own unique character and story. We're still growing, still innovating, still creating spaces where people can find a moment of peace and a perfect cup of coffee. My sister Andrea recently opened her own law practice in one of our shops. Michael holds his patient consultations in our garden space. And my parents? They've become regulars at the last page, proudly telling anyone who will listen about how their daughter revolutionized the coffee industry. But I'm most proud of the fact that in every Story Shop, whether it's in New York or London or Tokyo, you can still find the same thing that made our first location special. Not just great coffee, but a place where stories begin, where moments matter, where life slows down just enough to be savored, like a perfect cup of coffee on a quiet morning. And that's worth more than any billion-dollar offer.